Top. Hi there, viewers. Today I'm joining a conversation with author Judy A. Bernstein, the author of Disturbed in Their Next, the follow-up book to The Poured Fire Not from the Sky. It's a pleasure to have author Judy Bernstein on the show. Welcome on the show, Judy.
Thank you, Peter. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Honored to be here.
yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah. Judy, I actually love your book. I love Disturbed in the Next. I find it quite very alluring and I'm excited to have you on the show. Now, I want to ask you, I haven't heard about the story of the lost boys of Sudan as told in the Port Finals from the Sky. I read a place where you wrote of how you found out about their story in an article and how you heard from Joseph that some of the boys would be coming to San Diego in America. I want to ask you, how do you feel knowing that you'll be meeting one of the lost boys of Sudan for the very first time?
Well, that was 20 years ago.
Wow.
And I was a very American mother. I had never
Oh,
been to Africa.
yeah.
However, I was teaching a class as an advisor at the university. And I had several African students that year. One of them was Joseph Jock, who's from Sudan, South Sudan.
Oh, okay.
And so they sparked my curiosity. I had enjoyed working with them the whole year. And it was in May of 2001
Yeah.
that in Newsweek magazine, which is a very large publication here, I read this story that, back in the 80s, these young boys, thousands and thousands,
Mm.
had trekked 1,000 miles, from their country because of war and into refugee camps in Kenya. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, being the mother of a son and trying to imagine my own child and
Mm.
what their mother felt. Anyway, I get emotional talking about this story, excuse me.
Yeah.
But coincidentally,
Yeah.
Joseph, who'd never mentioned anything about what was going on in his country while we were doing projects here so much, came to me and said, America is resettling some of these boys from the camp in Kenya, where they had now been 10 years. Would you mind? He asked me as a favor. Of course, it ended up he did me one of the biggest favors in my life. He asked me as a favor to show them around San Diego, which is in Southern California,
Okay.
in the United States.
Yeah.
And I was, yeah, sure. I thought I was going to show them the beaches and the zoo and some of our tourist sites.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be very good for my 11-year-old son. So how did I feel? I was excited to meet them. What an honor to meet young men who had survived so much. I was nervous that we wouldn't be able to communicate. I didn't know if they had much English.
Mm.
I was nervous about what to say. I mean, they must have had so much trauma and they lost their families.
Yeah.
So they had experienced like the opposite life of me.
Absolutely.
And my son. But the minute I met him, we could communicate a little bit. Their English was pretty good, and they were just so excited to be here.
Wow. That's quite fascinating to know. Because, reading through the book and reading through your part of Disturbing Their Next is quite alluring to me. And following on your answer to that, I want to ask you, what do you imagine of Africa and Sudan after hearing about the story of the Lost Boys? How does the story of the Lost Boys make you think and imagine of war in Africa?
That's an excellent question, because I'm sure it's probably the same in Nigeria. Is on the news, which is our biggest exposure to outside our own country. And our news in America is very centered on America. So the main things we hear are things about war and violence. Those are what make the news. And so I had a very vague impression. I hadn't been to Africa yet. Although at the same time, there's so many beautiful documentaries where you see peace and the animals. And so
Yeah.
I had a very confused concept of what Africa was like. And of course, until I went there, I was like most Americans, pretty ignorant about what Africa was like. It's fabulous. And most every American I meet who goes there says it was the trip of a lifetime. It was, such a great place to go visit. And just like here, you probably hear of violence in America, but it's not everywhere. It's in tiny little places. It happens and it leaves.
Yeah.
So we get strange impressions. People ask me, how do you survive in California? There's earthquakes and mudslides. And I'm like,
Yeah.
this is maybe one of the most survivable places. So yeah, my impression of Africa was ignorance. I was ignorant.
Wow.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write about this. It's for
Wow,
people to know Africa and Africans.
Yeah, that's amazing to know. That's quite amazing to know. I discovered something while I was reading through Disturbed India Next. From reading the book, I realized that you've been wanting to write a book even before you heard about the story of the lost boys of Sudan. I want to ask you, do you saw it coming that the story of the lost boys of Sudan could ever make you an author? Were you excited about their story, leading you into realizing your dream of becoming an author? I'm just curious.
I never had a dream of becoming an author. I was a math major and I worked in the computer business. But in the early 90s, I read a story about this man in the early 1500s walked across the United States. And he walked from Florida to the Pacific coast. And we are always taught in school that the first people to cross the whole continent was in 1802, 300 years later. And they were these two white men, Lewis and Clark. So when I read about this African slave 300 years earlier, I was like, why is this not taught in our history books? Why has that important piece of history been excluded? That led me to try to learn how to write. But the last thing I wanted to do was write a book. I was more like a math person. But I did start going to writing classes. You can learn things. And so this was a whole new adventure for me. So it was because of writing that book, which I worked on for about 8 years, that I think when I read about the Lost Boys, I'm like, and here's little boys now in our century walking. I just connected to that whole story because I'd been writing about that. And so, that's the great thing about writing is one thing leads to another. I never would have visited many parts of the world if it hadn't been for writing becoming what it was. I got to go to Africa, India, and so writing to me is takes the author on a journey as well as hopefully the reader.
That's
and it
amazing.
has for me.
That's quite amazing to know. I'm happy to know about that. Now, Judy, let's talk about Alefo. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Alefo. That's
You
from
did.
Nigerian intonation.
You said it perfectly.
Oh, fantastic. I have my own divination of what I think of Alefo. His features and personality. If you ask me, Peter, how can you describe Alefo? There's a way I would answer you. Ordinarily by reading The Poured Fire from the Sky and this. Now, I want to ask you, I'd love to hear from you as someone who has met him physically. How can you describe Alefo?
Well, first of all, when all the boys came, they were very, very thin. They were 19 years old because they hadn't had a good nourishment in the camp. And they're tall. They come from the Dinka tribe in South Sudan, which
Yeah,
is a very tall tribe.
absolutely.
So all of them were tall and thin. They constantly tell me that they would have been a foot taller if they would have had good food because their mother was,
Wow.
much taller, etc. And so that's a shame. But Alefo is reserved. He's very regal in his bearing. He's quiet. He speaks when he has something serious to say. He and he does have a lot of serious things to say. To me, he's quite the philosopher and the poet. He's the observer. So he was, the saying, quiet rivers run deep. He wasn't on the surface. I had to kind of pull him out. Benson was much more talkative. And I didn't meet Benjamin for a few months until later. And he's very gregarious and charismatic and lots of hand movements and stuff. Alefo would just stand there watching and listening. And I wasn't quite sure what he was thinking. But maybe that's why he's a writer.
Oh, that's amazing. I was expecting you to say he's also inquisitive. I read of his numbers of questions. Let's ask him. There's a part I read and I boxed into laughter. I was like, oh my God, Alefo comes again with his questions.
Thank you. I forgot to add that. He's very inquisitive and he questions everything. He doesn't believe until it's been proven to him. He'll even say this of himself, I have to touch the fire before I believe it's hot. I won't, nobody can tell me.
Wow.
So yes, this is true. He questions everything and that's great. It's made him, he's very introspective.
Yeah.
Kind of an introvert, a deep thinker.
That's great. That's actually great. When I read The Port Foreigners from the Sky, there's a way I love to think as a philosopher, and there's a way I could point out some certain features that I think the boys possessed. Part of which I love to say that Alefo, it's someone who is bearing, has the spirit of perseverance. For someone to pass through that terrible situation, you must have the power of endurance in you, be able to endure even in face of harsh and terrible situation. And again, I would also love to say that someone is, what's it called? How will I put it? Ambitious, maybe. I love to use the word ambitious because following on from their time in the forest and the lorry when he was sick, and I wrote of a place where they mentioned that his leg was so thin that he scared if they will break before he arrived at the refugee camp they were taking them to. I think of him as someone who is just amazing to me because the story itself it's so amazing to me.
Yes, he's definitely is a survivor, but he's also a survivor who has a tremendous amount of empathy and for his fellow
Lost boys.
human beings.
Yeah.
He's very empathetic. He's very sensitive to other people and their suffering. And I think that actually ended up being part of his survival because he had to survive for the others too. And many of the boys have told me that teamwork was their best survival skill. That the boys who when they got a little bit of food, who were selfish and wouldn't share, were not the survivors.
Yeah.
And I think it's that empathy and everything else. And of course for his family and everything, but he's that way for everyone here as well. And America has been another really, really difficult journey for these young men. It's not easy to start life over here. It's challenging, and everybody, it seems to have a 20-year head start over you if you come here when you're 20. And, so there's a lot to learn, and it's really a different kind of journey, but you're not going to starve to death here. But there are other challenges that are very hard.
Absolutely. That's
So
great.
he is absolutely a survivor. Um, Only they think maybe 100,000 boys
Mm.
started out as victims of this situation.
Wow.
16,000 made it to Kakuma camp,
Wow.
and 3,600 were resettled in America. So you can see that
Wow.
only like 1 in 5 really survived.
Honestly, there's a massive drop.
It
That's
was
that's
takes a
serious.
strong spirit,
Mm.
because just the depression can crush you.
Honestly. Wow. Thank you, Judy. From reading your book, I also noticed that you were careful of accepting to be a mentor to the lost boys. I'm curious, what exactly led you to changing your mind to becoming their mentor, having arrived in America? Is it from your personal conviction or it was based on Cliff's influence?
Well, that's an excellent question. And of course, people would wonder, well, why was I hesitant in the first place? Well, I was busy being a writer and being a mother, and I was busy with my life. And then one day I meet these 3 young men. So, you don't just see stopping your whole life and and doing this. And I didn't know anything. I wasn't a social worker. I didn't know where they could get assistance or how they would do these things. And I didn't want to do a bad job for them. They needed professional help and that sort of thing. And so I was hesitant because I didn't feel capable. Um, and then it wasn't clear what that whole process meant. Would they live with you? Would you be responsible for their living here?
Hmm.
America is a little bit less communal than a lot of places. In other words, people are very independent. And it's like impossible to pay for 3 other people's living.
Hmm.
We all do well, but we don't make that much money that you can
Yeah.
support other people. So
Yeah.
it was not clear what that would all mean. But once it, and a Cliff was, of course, taken by them immediately. You can imagine an 11-year-old boy, and here's these 19-year-old boys who are looking to him for guidance.
Hmm.
He really enjoyed that. But what really changed, I think the main thing that changed was that first day. When you meet somebody in person and you make that connection, it just starts. And at the end of that first day, I knew I had to see them again. I couldn't walk away from them. They were just like amazing young men.
Hmm.
So then we went to see him again, and again and again, and things just
Hmm.
evolved. It
Hmm.
wasn't like one day. A little bit because of that thing that happened at the baseball game where we ran into that very bigoted man. I became really super angry, and I was like, yes, I have to be there. I have to advocate for them,
Hmm.
because they may run into this. And of course they did. There's bigotry in every country, right?
Fantastic.
It was an evolution. They were also doubtful about me, I think you picked up on, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They
I
were
read
like,
about.
why would this white lady be here? Why is she helping us? They were wondering if I wanted to get their money.
Well, the book is actually there's a mix of emotion there. If you read it, some part feel emotional and some part are very hilarious, especially the part where Alefo was on playing and his evolution, exchange, and acculturation from Africa to America. The way he see things and asking quite a lot of very funny questions. I laughed uncontrollably.
Yes, because he came from such a rural place. It's different
Yeah.
from like where you live. He hadn't encountered so many things. So like he would never have been able to imagine this loudspeaker you're sitting there talking to, and we are talking across the world or something like that.
That's amazing.
So yeah, even running water and electricity were magic at the time.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I also want to ask you, let's talk about Benson and Benjamin. I also have my own perception of their personality, especially with Benson. How can you describe them? I'd love to hear your opinion about that too.
So Benson is 2 years older than Alefo. And Benson is very much a determined, I would say, survivalist. Like he knew how his mother cooked. He knew all about the culture in the village. He's much more talkative and communicative. And so Alefo felt kind of moody and skeptical. Benson just plunged in and he was ready to, do what he could in here and take advantage of me. He was less suspicious. When he wrote, and I think you saw that, he wrote a lot about the culture of the Dinka and how to do things and how they survived in the village and
Absolutely.
about the animals. Now, he was
Absolutely.
also a little bit older, so he had a little bit more time with his mother because he was only 7, but Alefo was 5 when war came. So it kind of just, those waves of war destroyed their culture, their villages. They were hiding from the soldiers and this sort of thing. So Alefo was introduced to all that trauma a little bit earlier. And Benjamin was the youngest of those two when he made that journey. And he was pretty badly injured from when he fell out of a tree because somebody yelled lion and he had a stick in his leg. So Benjamin made that 1,000-mile trek when he was 5 years old.
Wow.
And when he arrived here, Benjamin was the tallest of all of them by about 4 inches. So I had kept imagining the smallest boy, strikingly good movie star looking man with the biggest, most beautiful smile. And he is very outgoing.
Wow.
He's always the center of the crowd, whereas Alefo would be standing back. Benson, is in the crowd, but Benjamin is a leader. He's the leader of the crowd. He's a fantastic public speaker. All of them are excellent public speakers.
Wow.
So different personalities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're quite amazing. They're quite amazing young men, and it's quite amazing to read about their story.
It's also amazing that they all have a talent for music, writing, and speaking. So it's kind of interesting.
They are perfect literary man. They have all those literary features of art and cultures imbibed in them. I particularly love Benson's writing. Like you said, it's very descriptive. I love to use the word descriptive in terms of writing. When I was reading The Port Founders from the Sky, some part written by Benson, the description of his African environment. Oh, there's someone that talked about, I think it was Alefo that wrote about a particular play that was common between young children, where one would act as a mother and the other would act like a father. I remember that play and I had it while I was much younger. So it made me remember the African environment. I was like, wow, this is amazing. It's description of the village. It gives you an ambience. Reading through it gives you an ambience of what an African environment, an African setup, village looks like. And it's very amazing with his use of words. I so much love it. Very, very
well. That's great. Yeah, I think he really brought Africa to life. And especially, for American readers who have never been there.
Yeah.
And the importance of, the village life and their culture and how they
Absolutely.
all work together. And their father was a mediator and a farmer, and he would go out and help solve disputes. Their father had a tremendous amount of influence, I think, on their character and personality.
Yeah.
through his work. And
Yeah.
their mother was strong and tough and gave them that strength, you know.
Mm. That's great. That's fantastic. I also learned that there is a movie coming up based on Disturbed in Their Nest. Could you tell us a bit about the movie and the progress of it?
I'd be happy to. So there's, you know, movies in America now get made so many ways. It's
Hmm.
just like with books. It used to be a publisher would do your book, but now people are publishing their own books and that sort of thing. So the door has been opened for new filmmakers, young, old, whatever,
Hmm.
to be able to make their own movies. And a lot of that's due to technology. You
Absolutely.
know, the equipment is so much cheaper and this sort of thing. So a young man moved into, you know, on the front of Disturb Their Nest, you'll see it's the story from Africa to City Heights
Yeah.
on the cover, the subtitle.
Yeah.
A young man moved into City Heights and he went to the bookstore and he picked up Disturbs in their nests. And he's like, oh my gosh, this takes place right in my neighborhood. You know, I have to read
Oh.
this book. Well, he's a filmmaker
Oh.
and he does video productions and that sort of thing for commercial videos. His name's
Mhm.
Ian Harrington. And he contacted us and he said, you know, I'd like to work together with you to turn Disturbed in Their Nests into a film.
Wow.
So it's what you'd call a grassroots effort. We've all been working on the screenplay, which is just about done. We've
Wow.
got some executive producers on board.
Amazing.
So we don't know what the next step is going to be. We don't know how long it's going to take. It's a journey. It's another journey.
Yeah.
It's just like the book.
Yeah.
So, but we're really excited about it.
Yeah. It's amazing. And I'm hopeful that that goes on smoothly and well.
Me too. Thank you. Who knows?
Thanks.
Maybe this interview will attract some people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's going to be fine. It's going to, because I actually love the book and it'll be great to have it in movie format. I'm looking forward to it. And I hope everything goes on perfectly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, Judy, anyone who read your book, we know that your husband, Paul, has a crucial role to play in your involvement with the Lost Boys. Because to me, not everyone might be so receptive like him, giving you the chance and sometimes encouragement with your mentorship of the Lost Boys. I'm curious, why do you think Paul supported you in the case of you being a mentor?
That's a good question. I think that he probably saw the impact that they were having on myself and Cliff.
Mm,
He saw Cliff's enthusiasm
mm,
and excitement. And, you know, for Cliff, it was meeting them. And, you know, he came home that day and talking about, Dad, you know, this is a child's point of view, 11. They've never had sodas with Coke and ice. They've never seen ice before. So to him, it was like meeting these people from a totally different world.
mm.
Yet they, you know, they spoke his language. They spoke English. They were older. They were wiser, but they were so respectful and eager to meet him because they were closer in age to Cliff than myself.
Mm.
So there was just this connection. I think that, you know, Paul saw that. He saw our enthusiasm. Paul is my husband is a physician. So he's definitely a person who is inclined to helping people.
Oh,
And so I think he saw our interest and he's always been supportive of the things I was passionate about, you know, my writing, the computer business. So I'm lucky to have a husband who is supportive and who did
yeah,
not resent it or was jealous. He was enthusiastic and he helped them a lot himself.
yeah.
He
That's actually great. I see what, looking at the stop in their next, looking at the characterization, that's why I'm more intrigued in its movie format. To see those characters coming alive in form of actors and actress. It will be very amazing to see and know how that goes. Quite amazing to know.
I agree. There's a lot there. Not only what the script has them say, but how the actors will be interpreting it. And
Yeah.
Peter, I'm wondering the same thing because I know them personally. So how is some actor going to be able to meet my expectations?
Expectations.
So that'll
That's
be interesting, and
abs-
I would think it's going to be difficult and a strange experience for Alefo
mm,
and
wow.
his brother.
Yeah, that's why I'm more excited and interested in the movie format. It's gonna be great. Now, Judy, let's talk about your writing style. I found it quite amazing, especially with the fact that the narrative style of the stop in the next blend so well, despite that it was written from the perception of two authors, that's you and Alefo. I'm curious to ask you, how do you and Alefo come about your style? Is this something you've developed over time through reading, or it's a style you derive from a particular famous author? I'm just curious.
Uh, no, it's something that evolved very organically. And remember, so the actual way this happened was
Hmm.
when the first year they were here, so much was happening. I started taking little notes, not because I wanted to write a book, but it was just because it was such, that year had a huge impact on me, my life,
Hmm.
meeting them. And it was such an amazing experience and adventure with tragedy, as you know, as well.
Yeah.
Um, so it wasn't for a couple of years that they were also writing,
Hmm.
mostly because they wanted me to correct their English, but they were, I was getting these stories from them. And so I first did a book similar to Disturbed in Their Nests, but most of it was my story about them because they didn't have time to write. They were learning how to, drive cars, get a job, do their laundry, all
Hmm.
those things they had to learn from scratch in America.
Yeah.
And that book we put together, when a publisher bought it, he said, he was a British editor. He said, I like this, but I want you to go back and write a whole different book. And I
Wow.
was like, I've been working on this book for 2 years. I got to start over.
All over
And he's,
again.
yes. But we did. And he
Wow.
wanted that book to be written mostly by Benson, Alefo, and Benjamin. And that became They Poured Fire on Us from the Sky. He
Hmm.
wanted the Africa story before the America story.
Hmm.
And now they had been here a few years. So now it was possible
Hmm.
because they did have a little bit of time. So we took that project on. We had a year to write the book. And I'm so thankful to Clive Priddle at Public Affairs, who made us do that, even though I was in shock at first. So your question about the writing style. So my goal at that time was to try to keep the integrity of their voices,
Yeah.
but make the English smoother and readable for the American person. So it was a sort of midway translation between keeping the integrity. The way they talk is very lyrical compared
Hmm.
to how Americans speak English.
Yeah.
And I hear it a little bit in your English too.
Oh.
So I wanted to keep the integrity of that voice, and their metaphors and their analogies were very African. So those were precious gems to keep in the voice.
Hmm.
So when we did They Poured Fire on Us from the Sky, my effort was to make sure I could keep their voice yet have it be readable for the American audience.
Hmm.
When we did Disturbed in Their Nest, Alefo had been here 15 years.
Wow.
So his voice had changed. He
Hmm.
was starting to sound more like an American.
Hmm.
So when you say our two voices blended, there was still his way of seeing things, but his English sounded more American.
Mm.
And so I think you probably, if you compared his writing from They Poured Fire
That's
to Disturb
true.
the Nest, you
That's
would see a
true.
little bit of a difference.
Difference. That's true.
More African voice in They Poured Fire.
That's true. That's
15
amazing to
years of
know.
difference. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually true.
So,
This sounds more like that's why I kind of compare the writing style to that of the famous Chinua Achebe and Things Fall Apart. Because if you read Things Fall Apart, you would see the tone of Achebe in his writing style. And I was like, Benson, no, tones look like that of Chinua Achebe. Alefo's title is very captivating, and they have a blend of emotion, they have a blend of brilliance, very, very brilliant. And it's just so amazing. Now, coming into Alefo transition here sounds a bit very different. Though I kind of prefer this. This is very nice in terms of this, because I'm an African, actually. Maybe I'm viewing it from the African perspective. So it's
well, and
kind
that's a good point, Peter, because that's what I had to do for Americans.
oh,
Is now, I don't know if you know this, but in American schools nowadays, most of the children have to read When Things Fell Apart by Chinua Achebe.
oh,
And that's
wow.
new. Americans didn't used to read like foreign stuff. We read about America, but it's great because they are reading that. But I needed to sort of make a translation for the American audience, not just
Yeah,
English, but a little bit of the voice.
yeah,
So it was an interesting process. Thank you for asking.
yeah.
But I'll tell you that as a writer, they gave me such an incredible gift of the most beautiful original material to work with.
Wow.
So it was easier than making up my own stuff. So as a writer, it made it easier
That's
for me.
amazing. Could you share with us some of the challenges you encountered while writing Disturbed in their next and how you ultimately overcame it? I'm pretty sure there will be quite a lot of challenge because the book is voluminous, it's a lot of work to do. I'd love to hear from you. What are the challenges you've encountered and how do you overcame it?
I knew the story arc because I wanted to write about his Alefo's first year in America,
Yeah.
and I wanted to write about my first year and how that impacted my life and it changed my life. So I knew the story arc, and if you've read the book, you'll see that that first year had kind of a natural story arc to it. There was, them first getting here, and then the challenges that they faced, and then some success by the end of the year. They still face a lot of challenges, but that was the story arc I wanted. But the question was how to tell it. Just tell it from my point of view about him, but he wanted to write too, and I had some writing left from that first book we had done 15 years earlier, the one I told you they never published.
Oh,
So I had a lot of that original material, and that was precious because it had all of that in there. And then the I don't know, it was a challenge. It was a great experience because now Alefo had been here 15 years. And the things that traumatized him and troubled him, he could look back on with great humor. Like when the girl in the grocery store told him, you remember that story? So now on so many things, he had a whole new perspective. So instead of them being traumatizing, he could look at them differently. And then the other things too. So it was a great experience for the two of us because it brought us together. And I was saying to him, that's what you were thinking? You were thinking that maybe I was trying to get money from you and I was telling him what I had been thinking. And so it really brought us together, that writing process, to really reveal after 15 years, all that we had been thinking during that first year, and how we had interpreted things. And so What was the challenge? You know, there's always a challenge when you're writing, right? Because you have to
Absolutely.
think about who's going to buy this book, and am I doing it in a way that somebody will eventually buy it? And I did
Mm,
want it to be a success, to, you know, hopefully help him. But at the same time, it was a whole new journey, and it was a really great journey.
mm,
So, and to me, that's one of the wonderful things about being a writer, is it
absolutely.
takes you on a great journey. Here I am speaking across the world to this nice young man in Nigeria that read both our books as part of the journey. And it's such a great experience I never would have had.
Yeah, that's
So,
amazing. That's great to know.
so.
Now, Judy, what about your writing? Are you currently working on another book? Should we be expecting another book from you?
So, writing's taken me on a great journey. Like I said, I've been in writers groups for maybe 25 or 30 years now, because
Wow.
I am not a natural writer. I had to work hard to learn the craft of writing, and I believe in getting all the help I can from all the other writers. And writers, they really like community. I think we all like to help each other.
Abs-
Um, so as I told you, back in the early 90s, 25 or almost 30 years ago, I started the book about the man who was walked across America. He was an African slave in the 1500s.
mm,
I go back and I work on that sometimes. I just finished working on the screenplay for
mm.
Disturbed in Their Nests, and I don't know. I may write another book. I'm just not sure what it's going to be at this time. I think it'll maybe be a fiction.
Oh, that would be
I've been
great.
writing a lot of true stories, and so I'm
Oh,
thinking I might do something a little bit different. I might also, one of the things that came out of both of our books is that Alefo and I and Benson and Benjamin spoke to hundreds of schools
that could be a
about
book
their
itself.
journey. And one thing that I really observed is that their story had a huge impact on people, young people in that age range of like 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, what we call middle school, young adult. They seem to be profoundly impacted by the story.
Mm,
And we received many letters. So I'm thinking of doing a book that's specifically for that age group.
that would be
Um,
great.
so Alefo and I did start thinking about one called The Boy Who Fell from the Sky. What were you going to name it? But anyway, about his journey, but it'll be more for that young, a little bit younger age group.
Yeah, that would be great
Because
actually, because
I saw the impact it had on young Americans, and we all need to learn more about the world outside our borders. And
yeah,
that's one of my passions.
that would be great. Because when I read the book, I found it quite inspiring. Despite the fact that it's a blend of morals and very sad, emotional story, real life story. I find it quite inspiring. And I think this, I don't know how far the book has gone in Africa, but I think this would be a very good read for schools and colleges and universities. It would be very, very good,
Mm.
actually. It would be good for it to be recommended in colleges and universities, just like Achebe books were recommended in schools and colleges all over Africa. I think this actually is a very good one of the thing I consider it is a good resource for the preservation of the history of the people of Sudan and the African community at large.
Mhm.
And it's quite inspiring. It inspired me because when I read the book, I was inspired to write a poem, If a Dead Could Bring Back the Dead, which was published in the Australian Plumbing Journal. It won an $100 prize. Then I'm also interested in
Great.
I'm just quite funny. It's quite funny when I received the message that it won a prize. I was like, wow, that's amazing. I was just writing poem. I never knew it's gonna. So it just quite fun, and I find it very amazing. It's quite alluring, and the story actually. Now I want to bring this in. It's actually like inspired me to write a DH in time of war, which is something that I actually want to write it particularly to like something like a mournful poem to mourn the sorrow of the people who have lost their life to wars across African countries. Talk about the Nigerian Biafra War. Talk about the war in Congo, the one in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and some other African countries. And as such, one of my major aims is also to talk about the brutality of war in Africa. Because looking at the people that are most affected by wars, they're majorly children who knows nothing about war, who do not even know about ethnics or whatsoever causes all this war. And they just lose their life in the case of what they cannot even recognize. While we have the initiators sitting down in their office commanding, okay, the next people to fight is go to this village and kill people there. It's terrible. It's terrible. War is a very deadly thing, and it's something that we should all, run away from, try and preserve. Because Meriden, the pot found us from the sky. I was like, thank God Alefo survived it. Thank God Benson survived. Thank God Benjamin survived it. But had they not survived it, there wouldn't have been the pot found us from the sky. Well, probably some other people who might survive it might tell the story. But it got me thinking about those boys who lost their life in the case of the war. Those boys who were killed by lions, those who died of starvation, those who died by diseases. It's just so horrible. I was like, how about these souls? How about these boys? What can we do? And I just thought to write a ditch because war is a terrible thing. It's a very emotional story. It's something that we should all preserve, like stay away from. And I'm hopeful that, the government in Africa would look into it and see the effect of war. It's very drastic. It's something that we all should avoid in order to preserve our land and have a good place to live in. The Poor Foreigners from the Sky is very motivational. It's a fantastic story. And I can go any extent talking about it. It's a story that I love so much.
Peter, that was the highest compliment you could have paid me as a writer, because one of my major missions with this book was to have people realize the impact of war on innocent people, mothers, children, and the soldiers themselves, young men forced by older men to go out and fight their battles from behind a desk, as you said.
Imagine.
And so I think we need to tell these stories over and over and over, and so that people think twice about it. And that what happens to children in war was one of the main reasons I wanted to write this whole story. So I'm really thrilled that was the main message you got from it, because that what I think is a message we can not hear too much. We need to keep telling those stories.
Absolutely.
It's happening in Ukraine now.
It's very sad.
And it's very sad. And it's happening places we don't even hear about. So
absolutely.
hearing what was happening in South Sudan, 2 million people died, 5 million people lost their homes, all these little boys. Do you know, I did not know about it.
Wow.
I did not hear anything on the news about it.
Wow.
And I was a grown adult who reads the newspaper all the time.
Wow.
And at the root of the conflict was something that we fight over all the time, oil. So I was actually driving my car to a comfortable grocery store, to a store, maybe on oil that was killing children. And these connections are the things that we don't realize the impact on somebody somewhere else. So thank you for that. I really appreciate your passionate retelling of what you got from the book.
You're welcome. It's a fantastic one.
And you're spreading the message farther. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
You're welcome. And for viewers who would love to get a copy of Disturbed in their next, I left a link in the description part of this interview where you can get a copy of both books directly from Amazon. Also left a link to the website of the Port Pioneers from the Sky for whoever would love to get the book and also take a look at the website. Thank you so much, Judy, for coming on the show. It's a pleasure having you on P English Literature.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's an honor to have been here. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.